The next outcome from a functional behavior assessment is the development of summary statements. Now, this is something that often confuses folks, so be sure you understand this. A summary statement is not just a general statement that you make after a functional behavior assessment. It is something very specific. It is a statement that includes the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequences, and it's written in the form of a hypothesis. So it includes those different things. Let's look at a few examples. Okay, here's an example of a summary statement. Read this statement, and I want you to look for some very specific things. The first thing that you want to look for is the behavior. What is the behavior, and is it written in action-object terms? What is the antecedent? What's the situation in which the behavior occurs? And what is the function of the behavior? Does it clearly state why the behavior occurs? There's a rule for summary statements I want you to follow. First of all, a summary statement can have multiple behaviors. Remember, we talked about response classes. You can have different behaviors all serving the same function. If you do, you put them in a summary statement. You can have multiple antecedents. A behavior can occur for the same reason under different conditions. However, you only have one function. You never have two functions in a summary statement. If you have two functions, you write a different summary statement for each function. So let's look at this one. Well, the summary statement here is when Paul has had little teacher attention and is doing independent seat work, he's likely to wander around and or call out to get the teacher attention. Well, what is the behavior? He's wandering around or calling out. So you've got two behaviors there. Now this one's a little tricky. What is the antecedent? Is the antecedent when he's had little teacher attention, or is it he's doing independent seat work? Well, it's both. You've got two situations here. He hasn't had a lot of attention. He's also doing independent seat work. So those are both antecedents. The function is to get teacher attention. That's the reason the behavior is occurring. Now, notice these summary statements just have basic information in them. They don't have a lot of stuff. They're usually one sentence. So it really is a statement. Let's look at another one. Okay, when Monique has not had much sleep and is asked to do independent work at her desk, she's likely to curse, tear up materials, and hit the teacher to escape from the task demands. Well, the function is clearly to escape from the task demands. The behavior is curse, tear up materials, and hit the teacher. So there are three different behaviors. They're all in this summary statement because they all serve the same purpose. They serve the purpose to escape demands. Now look at the antecedent. This one's a little trickier. This one has an antecedent, but it also has something else. Well, the antecedent is what's going on when the behavior occurs, and it's when she's asked to do independent seat work or independent work at her desk. That's the antecedent. Then we've got that other piece of information, when Monique has not had much sleep. What's that? Remember the term setting events. This is a setting event. It's something that is affecting her behavior that didn't necessarily happen at the same time as the behavior. What a setting event really does, it affects the relationship between an antecedent and a behavior and a consequence. So when she hasn't had a lot of sleep, probably what's happening is the work is more aversive. She doesn't feel like doing it. She's more motivated to escape it. So when you have a setting event, you include it in the summary statement in the form we have here. Okay, here's another example. When Jackie wants to maintain access to the MP3 player at the end of an activity, she'll spit and or hit the teacher to try to maintain access to the music. So here the reinforcer is to keep something that you've already got, and it's something tangible. It's a tangible activity or object. Okay, here's another one with Jackie, since Jackie has multiple functions. When Jackie's fought with siblings at home and is teased by classmates, she'll curse and or hit them to try to stop the negative teasing. So, in this case, the student is not trying to get or obtain something, she's trying to escape or avoid something. The antecedent is she's teased by classmates. The setting event is when she's fought with siblings at home. So when she's fought with siblings at home and she's then teased, she'll hit and curse to try to stop the teasing. Maybe when Jackie hasn't fought with siblings and she gets teased by classmates, maybe on those days she just ignores it. But if she's fought with her sibling, then it just puts her over the edge. I mean, setting events are sometimes hard because they're not happening in front of you and you don't always see them. You have to rely on communication with home sometimes, and sometimes that's not really good. So I've had kids in the past, and I'm sure there was some setting event, and I simply was never able to figure out what it was. I knew there was a setting event because there was a lot of variability in their behavior. They would go periods of time and not have a problem, and then bang, they'd have really terrible weeks, or a day here and there to just have lots of problems. There's a reason for behavior, and just because we don't know what the reason is doesn't mean there isn't a reason. Often that reason that we don't understand is some setting event out there that we just haven't been able to figure out. Alrighty, another one for Jackie. When she wants to control a game at recess, she'll spit and or hit classmates until they do what she wants. So here it's just she's trying to, the reinforcer is that she's getting other kids to conform. Jackie was actually a student of mine a few years ago. That's not her real name, but she did all these behaviors for these reasons. And here's another one. This is more of an internal situation. In situations with low levels of activity or attention, Rasputin will rock back and forth and drum on things for stimulation. So here, it's not something socially mediated. This is a student who is engaging in a behavior because it produces some kind of sensory consequence. The antecedent is simply, it's a low level of stimulation. He's doing this to try to regulate his level of stimulation. So this is a sensory regulation kind of behavior. This is how a summary statement would look for this kind of student. Okay, after you have done your initial information gathering, typically what we do is we'll do something like an indirect assessment. You'll do an interview with someone, and there's an example of an interview on the Blackboard page under the functional assessment tools. Take a look at that if you haven't already. It's a set of questions, and it's somewhat structured, but it's a way to get information about situations where a problem occurs, what usually happens after the behavior problem. Before you ask those questions, of course, you define the behavior really clearly. You work through that process with a person. Then you develop some summary statements. Summary statements are hypotheses about why the problem's occurring. You do that based on your interview data. The next step is you want to actually get some observational data. You want to observe the student, and you want to determine if your observations either confirm or disconfirm, or do they support or fail to support your hypotheses. So, what are the methods of gathering functional assessment information? Well, we already talked about indirect methods. These are things like interviews. I like to do these first because they help me narrow things down. After I do some interviews, I'm able to develop some summary statements or hypotheses. That helps me know what kind of data I might want to collect. Observations can be less formal or more formal. When we talk about systematic observations, we're talking about something that we've planned. There are different ways of getting the observational data. The book describes some different formats, and we're going to try some of these out in class as well. And then there's the functional analysis or manipulating things in the classroom. Again, we're not going to spend as much time on that because it's not something that you typically do in a school setting. One of the forms that's useful sometimes is something called the Motivation Assessment Scale. It's pretty easy to do, and it only takes a few minutes. It doesn't give you really specific information. It gives you just some general information, but sometimes it's a good start point. It consists of 16 different questions, and you sit down with an informant. They rate each question on a scale of 1 to 6, I believe, with 1 being never and 6 being always. And it's questions sort of like, would this behavior occur over and over repeatedly if no one was around the student? And if you said always, then that might suggest that the behavior happened for sensory reasons. But there's 16 questions like that. Each question relates to one of these 4 functions, either as sensory, escape, attention, or tangible. Tangible being, the kids doing this to get access to some kind of activity. Then you total up the ratings and you rank them, with what's the highest rating, next highest, and so forth. And sometimes this scale will indicate that a behavior is happening for escape or for attention. That's all you're going to get out of it. It's not going to tell you what the kid's trying to escape or what kind of attention the kid's trying to get. So it's a starting point. There will be a copy of this on the Blackboard page so you can look at it. It's a good thing just to try out. You don't lose much because it's easy to do. It doesn't take a lot of time. Just don't expect it to give you real detailed information. It simply won't. There's some other forms that I'll mention. Problem behavior questionnaire, similar to the motivation assessment scale. Something that is more useful, however, is the functional assessment interview. It's the form that I learned to use, and it's by a person named Rob O'Neill that I actually worked for a few years. A version of that is actually on the Blackboard page. This is a more in-depth interview you do with someone who spent a lot of time with the student. I find this gives me some very detailed information that I'm able to use to formulate some summary statements or hypotheses. We'll do this together in class. And then we'll follow that up with some direct observation. After you've done the interview, develop some summary statements, you get some information or some observational data and determine if it's your hypothesis. So, the process is this. You use these different tools to get information on the functional assessment outcomes that we listed already. Then you develop some summary statements. Summary statements are hypotheses that are based on the information you have. Then you do some observations. You confirm the summary statements, or sometimes you revise them. For example, after doing the interview, you may have 2 different summary statements because you believe there are 2 different functions to the behavior. After you do an observation, you may find there's 1. Sometimes you start out with 1 summary statement and you find out there are actually 2. There are 2 different reasons the behavior occurs.